In the heart of ancient Italy, along the banks of the Tiber River, rose a civilization that would dominate the known world for over 1,000 years. From a small city-state to an empire spanning 3 continents, Rome's story is one of conquest, innovation, betrayal, and ultimately, transformation. This is the epic tale of the Roman Empire, how it rose from humble beginnings to rule the ancient world, and how it fell, leaving an indelible mark on human history that echoes to this day. The ruins of the Colosseum stand as silent witnesses to Rome's former glory. The Forum, once the beating heart of the greatest empire the world had ever seen, now lies in fragments. But these stones tell a story of ambition, power, genius, and hubris that shaped the destiny of millions and laid the foundation for the modern world.
The birth of Rome. Our story begins not with historical fact, but with legend. According to Roman mythology, in the years 753 BCE, twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and raised by a she-wolf, founded the city of Rome on the Palatine Hill. Romulus would become Rome's first king after killing his brother in a dispute over where to build their city. A violent beginning that would foreshadow Rome's future. But beyond the myths lies archaeological evidence of early settlements in the area. The Romans themselves were likely descendants of the Latins, an Indo-European people who migrated to central Italy around 1000 BCE. They settled among other Italian tribes, the Etruscans to the north, who were skilled metal workers and artists, and various other peoples who would all eventually be absorbed into the growing Roman identity. The early Roman kingdom was ruled by 7 legendary kings, the last 3 of whom were Etruscan. These rulers transformed Rome from a collection of hilltop villages into a proper city. They drained the marshy areas, built the first version of the Forum, and established many of the religious and political traditions that would endure for centuries. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant whose reign ended in 509 BCE when the Roman aristocrats, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, overthrew the monarchy and established the Roman Republic. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of Rome's expansion from a small city-state into a Mediterranean powerhouse. The new republic was governed by 2 consuls elected annually, advised by the Senate, a body of former magistrates drawn from Rome's patrician class. But the plebeians, the common citizens, would not remain voiceless. Over the next 2 centuries, they fought for and won political representation, creating a complex system of checks and balances that would govern Rome for nearly 500 years. The Roman military, organized into legions of citizen soldiers, began its systematic conquest of Italy. Unlike other ancient powers that ruled through fear alone, Rome offered something revolutionary: citizenship and alliance to those it conquered. Defeated enemies could become Roman citizens. Their gods could join the Roman pantheon, and their sons could serve in Roman legions. This inclusive approach to empire building would become Rome's secret weapon. By 264 BCE, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. But their greatest challenges lay across the Mediterranean, where another great power was rising: Carthage. The Punic Wars and Mediterranean dominance. The three Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage would determine the fate of the Mediterranean world. Carthage, founded by Phoenician colonists in what is now Tunisia, had built a vast commercial empire based on sea power and trade. By the 3rd century BCE, these two powers were destined to collide. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE over control of Sicily. For over 20 years, Rome and Carthage battled for supremacy. Rome, traditionally a land power, was forced to build its first major navy. Despite suffering catastrophic defeats, including the loss of entire fleets to storms, Rome persevered. The war ended in 241 BCE, with Carthage's defeat and Rome's acquisition of Sicily, its first overseas province. But it was the Second Punic War that would become legendary. In 218 BCE, a young Carthaginian general named Hannibal embarked on one of history's most audacious military campaigns. Leading an army of 90,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, he crossed the Alps in winter, a feat that cost him nearly half his army but achieved complete strategic surprise. For 16 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy, winning crushing victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously at Cannae in 216 BCE, where he surrounded and destroyed a Roman army twice the size of his own. At Cannae, Rome lost 70,000 men in a single day, one of the worst military disasters in history. But Rome's true strength lay not in any single victory, but in its ability to endure defeats. While Hannibal won battles, he could not win the war. Rome's Italian allies largely remained loyal, and the Roman Senate refused to negotiate. Instead, they pursued a strategy of attrition, avoiding major battles while harassing Hannibal's forces. The tide turned when a young Roman general named Scipio took the war to Africa. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal decisively, ending the Second Punic War. Carthage was reduced to a Roman client state, forced to pay massive reparations and surrender its fleet. The Third Punic War was really no war at all. It was Rome's final solution to the Carthaginian problem. In 146 BCE, despite Carthage posing no real threat, Rome besieged and destroyed the city completely. The Romans sold the survivors into slavery and scattered salt on the ruins. Though this detail is likely a later invention, it captures the totality of Carthage's destruction. With Carthage eliminated, Rome turned its attention to the wealthy kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean. In rapid succession, they defeated Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and brought Greece under Roman control. By 146 BCE, the same year Carthage fell, Rome had also destroyed Corinth, demonstrating to the Greek world that the age of Roman dominance had begun. The wars of conquest brought enormous wealth to Rome, but also began to transform Roman society in ways that would ultimately prove destructive. Slave labor from conquered territories displaced small farmers, who flocked to Rome seeking work. A new class of super-wealthy elites emerged, while traditional Roman values of simplicity and civic virtue began to erode under the influence of Greek luxury and philosophy.
The Late Republic and Civil Wars. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome's conquests had created problems that the republican system was never designed to handle. The constant wars required professional armies rather than citizen farmers who could return to their fields. The influx of wealth and slaves disrupted traditional Roman society. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically, creating social tensions that would eventually tear the Republic apart. The first cracks appeared with the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who served as tribunes in the 130s and 120s BCE.
They attempted to redistribute public land to landless citizens and provide grain subsidies to the urban poor. Both were killed by conservative senators who saw their reforms as threats to the established order. The precedent of political violence had been set. The Social War of 91 to 88 BCE saw Rome's Italian allies demand full citizenship rights. After a brutal conflict, Rome granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of Italy, a decision that would prove crucial to Rome's future success, but also diluted traditional Roman identity. Then came the age of the great generals and their personal armies. Gaius Marius revolutionized the Roman military, recruiting landless citizens into professional legions loyal to their commanders rather than the state. His rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, would march on Rome itself with his legions, the first Roman general to do so. Sulla's dictatorship from 82 to 79 BCE introduced the world to a new kind of political violence, the proscription list. Thousands of Sulla's enemies were declared outlaws, their property confiscated, and their lives forfeit to any who killed them. The heads of prominent Romans, including consuls and tribunes, were displayed in the forum. When Sulla retired voluntarily, surprising everyone, he had demonstrated that the Republic's institutions could no longer contain ambitious men with loyal armies. The next generation produced three men who would divide the Roman world among themselves: Gaius Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Gaius Julius Caesar. In 60 BCE, they formed the First Triumvirate, a secret alliance to control Roman politics. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, sought military glory to match his wealth. In 53 BCE, he led an army against the Parthian Empire, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of Carrhae. The Parthians reportedly poured gold down his throat, saying, "Now satisfy yourself with the metal for which you have always thirsted." With Crassus dead, the alliance between Pompey and Caesar crumbled. Pompey, backed by the Senate, demanded that Caesar return to Rome as a private citizen to face charges. But Caesar knew that without his proconsular immunity, his enemies would destroy him. On January 10th, 49 BCE, Caesar made his fateful decision. Leading the 13th Legion across the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, he uttered the words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. The great Roman Civil War had begun. Caesar's swift campaign in Italy forced Pompey to flee to Greece. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar defeated Pompey decisively. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by courtiers hoping to curry favor with Caesar, a decision that disgusted Caesar when he arrived and was presented with Pompey's severed head. Caesar pursued his remaining enemies to Africa and Spain, winning victory after victory. By 45 BCE, he was the undisputed master of the Roman world. But his position was precarious. The Republican system had no place for a permanent dictator, and Caesar's reforms, expanding citizenship, reorganizing the calendar, planning massive public works, seemed to many like the acts of a king. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a conspiracy of senators led by Marcus Junius Brutus, descendant of the Brutus who had founded the Republic, and Gaius Cassius Longinus. They struck him down at the foot of Pompey's statue, and Caesar fell bleeding from 23 wounds. But the conspirators had no plan beyond murder. The Roman people, who had benefited from Caesar's largesse, were furious. Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, delivered a masterful funeral oration that turned public opinion against the assassins.
When Caesar's will was read, revealing that he had left money to every citizen and his gardens to be a public park, the people rioted. The conspirators fled Rome, but the Republic was not restored. Instead, a new civil war began as Caesar's heirs fought for control of his legacy.
Augustus and the birth of empire. From the chaos following Caesar's assassination emerged three men who would divide the Roman world in the Second Triumvirate: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant; Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Caesar's master of horse; and most surprisingly, Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew and adopted heir, Gaius Octavius, who took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. The young Octavian was underestimated by everyone, including Cicero, who hoped to use him against Antony and then discard him. But Octavian proved to be a political genius with an instinct for survival that would reshape the Roman world. First, the triumvirs dealt with Caesar's assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Brutus and Cassius were defeated and committed suicide. The Republic's last defenders were dead. The triumvirs then divided the Roman world. Antony took the wealthy east, Octavian the chaotic west, and Lepidus received Africa, until Octavian sidelined him, leaving only two men standing. The final confrontation between Octavian and Antony was as much about competing visions of Rome's future as personal ambition. Antony, based in Alexandria, had become increasingly influenced by Hellenistic court culture and his relationship with Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt. Their partnership scandalized traditional Romans, who saw it as a betrayal of Roman values. Octavian masterfully portrayed the coming conflict not as another civil war between Romans, but as a patriotic struggle against foreign enemies. When Antony divorced Octavian's sister to marry Cleopatra, and when Antony's will, allegedly revealing plans to move Rome's capital to Alexandria, was read in the Senate, public opinion turned decisively against him. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was the climactic naval engagement. Antony and Cleopatra's larger fleet was outmaneuvered by Octavian's admiral Agrippa. When Cleopatra fled with her ships, Antony followed, abandoning his army. Both would commit suicide the following year as Octavian's forces occupied Egypt. At age 32, Octavian was the sole master of the Roman world. But he faced the same problem that had destroyed Caesar: how to maintain power in a system that rejected monarchy. His solution was masterful. He would restore the Republic in form while transforming it completely in substance. In 27 BCE, Octavian formally returned power to the Senate and people of Rome. In gratitude, they granted him the honorary title Augustus, meaning revered one, and gave him extraordinary powers that made him effectively Rome's first emperor, though he never used that title. He called himself Princeps, first citizen, and his settlement became known as the Principate. Augustus's genius lay in his understanding that Romans would accept autocracy as long as it was disguised as restored republican tradition. He held multiple offices simultaneously, controlled the armies through his imperium, and gradually accumulated powers that made him indispensable while maintaining the fiction that he was merely the Senate's faithful servant. The Augustan age that followed was one of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The Pax Romana, Roman peace, began, bringing stability to the Mediterranean world that would last for 2 centuries. Augustus reorganized the military, creating permanent legions stationed on the frontiers. He established the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor and maintain order in Rome. He rebuilt the city magnificently, boasting that he found Rome brick and left it marble. Literature flourished under Augustus's patronage. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, creating a national epic that connected Rome's destiny to the will of the gods. Ovid composed his Metamorphoses and scandalous love poetry. Horace celebrated the virtues of the new age. The historian Livy chronicled Rome's rise from its legendary foundation. Augustus also began the systematic Romanization of the empire. Roman law, Roman engineering, Roman architecture, and Roman customs spread throughout the provinces. Local elites were encouraged to adopt Roman ways and could aspire to Roman citizenship and even high office. The empire became a vehicle for cultural assimilation on an unprecedented scale. When Augustus died in 14 CE, after ruling for 45 years, he had transformed Rome from a war-torn republic to a stable empire that would endure for centuries. His stepson Tiberius succeeded him, establishing the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the principle of imperial succession that would govern Rome for the next 3 centuries. The Roman Republic was dead, but the Roman Empire was just beginning its greatest age.
The height of empire. The 2 centuries following Augustus's death marked the zenith of Roman power and civilization. Under the Julio-Claudian dynasty and their successors, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent and experienced unprecedented prosperity, cultural achievement, and technological innovation. Tiberius, Augustus's reluctant heir, proved to be a competent but reclusive ruler who spent his final years on the island of Capri, leaving Rome's administration to the capable but sinister Sejanus, until he had him executed for treason. Tiberius's death in 37 CE brought his grandnephew Caligula to power, whose brief reign descended into madness and megalomania before his assassination by the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorians then discovered Caligula's uncle Claudius hiding behind palace curtains and proclaimed him emperor, the first time the military had chosen Rome's ruler. Despite his physical disabilities and scholarly disposition, Claudius proved surprisingly effective. He conquered Britain in 43 CE, adding Rome's most distant province, and reformed the empire's administration, introducing efficiency and meritocracy. Claudius's death by poison, allegedly administered by his wife Agrippina to advance her son, brought the infamous Nero to the throne at age 16. Initially guided by the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, Nero's early reign showed promise. But power corrupted him absolutely. He murdered his mother, his wife, and countless senators. When the Great Fire devastated Rome in 64 CE, he blamed the Christians, beginning the first systematic persecution of this new religious movement. Nero's excesses finally provoked rebellion. The year of 4 emperors in 69 CE saw the empire convulsed by civil war until Vespasian, a pragmatic general from the Jewish wars, established the Flavian dynasty. He and his sons Titus and Domitian brought stability and military success, completing the conquest of Britain and building the magnificent Colosseum. But it was under the Nerva and Antonine dynasty that Rome reached its true golden age. Nerva, chosen by the Senate after Domitian's assassination, established the principle of adoption, choosing the most capable successor rather than relying on hereditary succession. Trajan, the first provincial emperor, expanded Roman territory to its greatest extent. His conquest of Dacia brought enormous wealth to Rome, funding massive building projects including Trajan's Forum and Column. His campaigns against the Parthian Empire briefly brought Mesopotamia under Roman control, with Roman legions reaching the Persian Gulf. Under Hadrian, Rome's borders were consolidated and fortified. The famous Hadrian's Wall across northern England marked the empire's limit in Britain. Hadrian personally toured every province, rebuilding cities, founding colonies, and strengthening defenses.
His reconstruction of Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina and his banning of circumcision provoked the devastating Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 135 CE, which resulted in the near extermination of Judean Jewry. Antoninus Pius's peaceful 23-year reign saw the empire at its most prosperous and stable. Trade flourished along Roman roads that connected Britain to the Euphrates, Spain to the Black Sea. Roman engineering marvels like the Pantheon, with its impossible concrete dome, still inspire wonder today. Roman law provided the foundation for legal systems that survive in modified form across much of the modern world. Latin became the lingua franca of the Western Empire, while Greek served the same function in the East. Roman literature produced masterworks like Tacitus's Histories, Juvenal's Satires, and Apuleius's novel The Golden Ass. Roman art and architecture influenced styles throughout Europe and beyond. But beneath this golden facade, problems were accumulating that would eventually overwhelm the empire's capacity to solve them.
Crisis and transformation. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE marked the end of the Pax Romana and the beginning of a period of crisis that would transform the Roman Empire beyond recognition. His son Commodus, who succeeded him, embodied everything wrong with hereditary succession: paranoid, megalomaniacal, and obsessed with gladiatorial games while ignoring the serious challenges facing the empire. After Commodus's assassination in 192 CE, another civil war erupted. The eventual winner, Septimius Severus, established a military dynasty that increasingly relied on the army's support rather than senatorial approval. His deathbed advice to his sons, "Enrich the soldiers and scorn everyone else," epitomized the empire's new reality. The 3rd century CE brought the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of near constant warfare, economic collapse, and political chaos. In 50 years, the empire had over 50 emperors, most of whom died violent deaths. Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine and Danube in massive raids. The Sassanid Persian Empire captured the Emperor Valerian in 260 CE, humiliating Rome before the world. Plague swept through the empire, killing millions and weakening its military manpower. The economy collapsed as emperors debased the currency to pay their armies, causing hyperinflation. Trade networks broke down as roads became unsafe and cities shrank behind defensive walls. In some provinces, local strongmen effectively replaced imperial authority. The empire seemed on the verge of complete dissolution. Several factors had contributed to this crisis. The empire's expansion had stopped, ending the influx of wealth from conquest. The cost of defending increasingly long frontiers had grown enormous. Climate change in Northern Europe was pushing tribal peoples against Roman borders. The spread of Christianity was undermining traditional Roman religious and civic values. Most critically, the Roman political system had no mechanism for peaceful succession, leading to constant civil wars that weakened the empire's ability to face external threats. Salvation came from an unlikely source, a series of tough soldier emperors from the Danube provinces. Claudius II defeated a massive Gothic invasion. Aurelian reunited the empire after defeating breakaway kingdoms in Gaul and Palmyra, earning the title Restorer of the World. But the most significant reforms came under Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 CE. Diocletian recognized that the empire had become too large and complex for one man to govern effectively. His solution was radical. He divided the empire into 4 parts, each ruled by a separate emperor, in what became known as the Tetrarchy. This system provided more effective local governance and reduced the likelihood of successful rebellions. More importantly, Diocletian transformed the nature of imperial rule itself. Gone was Augustus's fiction of the restored republic. Diocletian ruled as an absolute monarch in the Persian style, with replete court ceremonies and divine honors. The emperor was no longer the princeps, first citizen, but dominus, lord and master. Diocletian's administrative reforms created a vast bureaucracy that separated civil and military authority. His economic reforms attempted to control inflation through price controls, one of history's first comprehensive attempts at a command economy. His religious persecution of Christians was the last and most severe attempt to restore traditional Roman religion. When Diocletian voluntarily retired in 305 CE, one of only 2 emperors ever to do so peacefully, his tetrarchic system immediately collapsed in civil war. But the principle of dividing the empire's administration survived, and one man would emerge from this chaos to create a new kind of Roman Empire entirely. Constantine the Great defeated his rivals through a combination of military genius and political innovation. His victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE was attributed to divine favor after he claimed to have seen a vision of the Christian cross with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether this vision was genuine religious experience or political calculation, it marked a turning point in world history. Constantine's conversion to Christianity, though he was not baptized until his deathbed, made Christianity the empire's favored religion. The Edict of Milan in 313 CE granted religious toleration throughout the empire, ending centuries of persecution. Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to resolve theological disputes, beginning the process of creating an orthodox Christian doctrine. Perhaps even more significantly, Constantine founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, the New Rome, built on the site of ancient Byzantium. This strategic location on the Bosporus controlled the passage between Europe and Asia and would serve as the seat of Roman power for another 1,000 years. When Constantine died in 337 CE, he left behind an empire that was Christian, bureaucratic, and fundamentally different from the classical Roman Empire of Augustus. The transformation was complete. Rome had evolved to survive, but in the process, it had become something entirely new.
The fall of the West. The Roman Empire that emerged from Constantine's reforms bore little resemblance to the classical civilization of Augustus or Marcus Aurelius. Increasingly Christian, bureaucratic, and militarized, it was better described as the late Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire, though its inhabitants continued to call themselves Romans until the very end. The empire was now permanently divided into western and eastern halves, each with its own emperor, administration, and military. The division, originally administrative, became increasingly real as the two halves developed different languages, cultures, and destinies. The West, centered on Rome and later Ravenna, faced the immediate pressure of Germanic migrations. The East, ruled from Constantinople, proved more stable and prosperous. The crisis that would destroy the Western Empire began on the steppes of Central Asia. Around 370 CE, the Hunnic Confederation under their king Attila swept westward, displacing Gothic converted to Arian Christianity and served in Roman armies, sought refuge within the empire's borders. The Roman Emperor Valens agreed to accept the Visigoths as foederati, federated allies who would serve in the Roman army in exchange for land and subsidies. But Roman officials abused and mistreated the Gothic refugees, leading to revolt. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, a Gothic army annihilated a Roman force and killed Valens himself, the worst Roman military disaster since Cannae 600 years earlier. Theodosius I managed to stabilize the situation temporarily, but his death in 395 CE left the empire divided between his young sons, Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east. Real power lay with military strongmen like Stilicho in the west and Rufinus in the east, both of whom were actually of Germanic origin. The early 5th century saw a cascade of barbarian invasions that overwhelmed the Western Empire's defenses.
On New Year's Eve 406 CE, a confederation of Vandals, Alans, and Suebi crossed the frozen Rhine and ravaged Gaul for 3 years before moving into Spain. The Visigoths, under their king Alaric, invaded Italy repeatedly, finally sacking Rome itself in 410 CE, the first time the Eternal City had fallen to foreign enemies in 800 years. The sack of Rome by Alaric sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. In Bethlehem, St. Jerome wrote, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." Refugees flooded into Africa and the East, bringing tales of destruction and despair. The Western Empire's prestige was shattered, but worse was to come. The Vandals, led by their king Genseric, conquered Roman North Africa, depriving the Western Empire of crucial tax revenues and grain supplies. In 455 CE, they sailed from Carthage to sack Rome again, systematically looting the city's treasures over 14 days. The most terrifying threat came from Attila the Hun. From his capital in Hungary, Attila ruled a vast confederation of tribes that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Known as the Scourge of God, he invaded Gaul in 451 CE, but was stopped at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains by a combined Roman Visigothic army led by the Roman general Aetius, one of Rome's last great military victories. The following year, Attila invaded Italy. Pope Leo I met him outside Rome and somehow persuaded him to withdraw. Whether through diplomacy, bribery, or divine intervention remains unclear. Attila's sudden death in 453 CE removed the Hunnic threat, but by then, the Western Empire was beyond saving. The last century of the Western Empire saw a parade of puppet emperors controlled by Germanic warlords. Ricimer, a Suebi general, made and unmade emperors at will for 20 years. The empire's territory shrank constantly as Germanic kingdoms established themselves in former Roman provinces, the Visigoths in Spain, the Vandals in Africa, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Franks and Burgundians in Gaul. The end came almost as an anticlimax. In 476 CE, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, ironically named after Rome's founder and first emperor. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, claiming he would rule Italy as the Eastern Emperor's representative. In practice, this marked the end of the Western Roman Empire. But was this really the fall of Rome? Modern historians increasingly view 476 CE as just another political transition rather than a dramatic collapse. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. In the West, Germanic kingdoms maintained many Roman institutions, laws, and customs. The Catholic Church preserved Latin learning and Roman administrative practices. In many ways, the barbarian kingdoms were more Roman than barbarian. The transformation of the Roman Empire into medieval Europe was gradual and complex. Rome did not fall in a single catastrophic event, but slowly transformed into something new. The last Roman emperor in the West was deposed in 476 CE, but Roman senators continued to meet in Rome. Latin remained the language of learning and administration. Roman law evolved into the legal systems of medieval Europe. The Pope claimed to be the heir of Roman authority. Even Charlemagne's coronation as Roman emperor in 800 CE showed the continuing power of the Roman idea. Perhaps it is better to speak not of the fall of Rome, but of its transformation. The Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire in the East and evolved into the medieval kingdoms of Western Europe. Roman civilization did not disappear. It adapted, survived, and provided the foundation for everything that followed. The legacy of Rome is all around us, in our laws and languages, our architecture and engineering, our concepts of citizenship and government. The Roman Empire fell, but Roman civilization endures. In conquering the ancient world, Rome itself was conquered by the ideas and peoples it absorbed, creating a synthesis that shaped the development of Western civilization for the next 2 millennia. As Edward Gibbon wrote in his monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, the story of Rome's end is not just the history of a single state, but the greatest, perhaps, and most awful scene in the history of mankind. The Roman Empire rose and fell, but its influence echoes still in the modern world, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition, innovation, and adaptation.